The company goes to Marcus. Of course, my brother announced at our father's funeral reception, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. He stood near the bar of the country club where we'd gathered to remember our father, holding a whiskey in one hand while the other rested possessively on the shoulder of our company's CFO. Dad always intended for his son to take over the business. That's just how these things work. Around him, longtime employees and business associates nodded uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. They'd worked with my father for decades, watched me grow up in the offices of Chen Manufacturing, seen me work summers and weekends learning every aspect of the business. But Marcus was the firstborn, the son, the one with the MBA from Wharton and the confidence that came from never being questioned. I stood across the room in my black dress, holding a glass of wine I hadn't touched, and watched my brother claim our father's legacy as if I didn't exist, as if the past 10 years I'd spent learning the business from the ground up, earning my own MBA while working full-time, building relationships with every client and vendor, meant nothing compared to the accident of his gender and birth order. Emma understands. Don't you, sis? Marcus called out, finally acknowledging my presence with a patronizing smile. You've got your nice comfortable position in marketing. That's perfect for you. But running a manufacturing empire, that takes someone who understands the real complexities of business, not just pretty brochures and social media posts. The room fell silent, everyone waiting for my response. They expected tears, protests, an emotional scene that would confirm Marcus's narrative about his overly emotional little sister, who couldn't handle the pressure of real business decisions. Instead, I smiled. You're absolutely right, Marcus, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. The company is yours. I hope you'll be very happy running it. The confusion on his face was worth everything that was about to come. He'd expected a fight, prepared arguments for why Dad's will left him in control, rehearsed explanations about traditional business succession. My immediate surrender wasn't part of his script. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew except for the 3 people I'd been secretly working with for the past 6 months, was that Dad's will was a fiction. Marcus hadn't inherited control of Chen Manufacturing. He'd inherited a carefully constructed illusion that would collapse the moment I stopped propping it up from behind the scenes. And in exactly 18 months, my brother would be bankrupt, disgraced, and begging me to save him from the consequences of his own incompetence. Before we dive into how a marketing girl dismantled her brother's empire using nothing but patience, strategic intelligence, and intimate knowledge of every weakness in a company he thought he understood, I want to thank each of you for being part of our community of over 500,000 subscribers who believe that underestimation is the best weapon the overlooked can wield. If you've ever been dismissed because of your gender, your age, or assumptions about what you're capable of, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button to join thousands who appreciate tales of long-term strategy where victory isn't won through confrontation but through letting arrogant people destroy themselves, while you control every variable they don't see. Now let's step into the world of family business succession, where a daughter thought to be decorative was actually the architect of everything her brother believed he'd built. My name is Emma Chen, and I am the second-born child of Michael and Susan Chen, founders of Chen Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial equipment company based in Pittsburgh that had grown from a small machine shop into a $150 million enterprise over 40 years of careful management and quality craftsmanship. My brother Marcus was born first, 3 years before me. And from the moment of his birth, he was the golden child. The son who would carry on the family name, inherit the business, fulfill the immigrant dream that our parents had sacrificed everything to achieve. Our parents came to America from Taiwan in the 1970s with engineering degrees that weren't recognized in the United States, $500 in savings, and determination that bordered on obsession. My father worked as a machinist during the day and took night classes to earn his American engineering credentials. My mother cleaned houses while studying English and eventually becoming a bookkeeper for small businesses in Pittsburgh's Taiwanese community. They saved every penny for 15 years before finally having enough capital to open their own shop, a small manufacturing facility in an industrial park outside Pittsburgh that made precision components for larger manufacturers. The work was unglamorous but profitable, serving the steel industry and automotive suppliers who needed reliable, quality parts delivered on time. Chen Manufacturing grew slowly but steadily, built on my father's engineering excellence and my mother's financial discipline. They reinvested profits into better equipment, hired skilled workers they treated like family, and earned a reputation for quality that allowed them to command premium prices. Marcus was 8 years old when the company really took off, landing a major contract with a Fortune 500 manufacturer that tripled their revenue in a single year. I was 5, just starting kindergarten, watching my parents work 18-hour days to fulfill orders while Marcus got to visit the factory and learn about the business. From my earliest memories, the message was clear. Marcus was being groomed to take over the company. I was expected to be supportive, to understand that this was how family businesses worked, to find my own path that wouldn't conflict with his inevitable succession. Your brother will need your support when he takes over, my mother would tell me. A strong family is the foundation of a strong business. I accepted this narrative completely as a child. Marcus was the heir. I was the spare. He would run the business. I would probably marry well and have children. And the Chen family legacy would continue through the male line as tradition dictated. But something shifted when I was 12 years old and Marcus was 15. Our father had a heart attack, not fatal, but serious enough to require surgery and months of recovery. During his absence, our mother stepped up to run the company, and I spent that summer working in the office, filing papers, answering phones, and watching her make decisions that kept everything running smoothly. That's when I discovered that I loved business. Not the abstract theory of it, but the practical reality of how companies operated. The puzzle of matching production capacity to customer demand. The strategy of pricing that balanced profitability with competitiveness. The human dynamics of managing workers who needed both discipline and respect. I started spending every summer at Chen Manufacturing, gradually taking on more responsibilities as I got older. By high school, I was managing the social media presence my parents didn't understand, redesigning marketing materials that had looked the same for decades, and attending trade shows to learn about industry trends. Marcus, meanwhile, was the golden boy heading to Wharton for his MBA, networking with the right people, learning business theory in prestigious classrooms while I was on factory floors understanding how things actually worked. The assumption was that I was helping out until Marcus graduated and returned to take his rightful place. What no one recognized, what I barely recognized myself at first, was that I was building comprehensive knowledge of the business while my brother was learning to talk impressively about concepts he'd never actually implemented. When Marcus returned from Wharton, he arrived with the confidence of someone who'd been educated at a top business school and the arrogance of someone who'd never actually failed at anything. He was given the title of VP of Operations and an office next to our father's, positioned as the heir apparent who would gradually take over as Dad approached retirement. I was given the title of Marketing Director and an office in a different building, positioned as the helpful daughter who managed the soft aspects of business while the men handled real decision-making. The dynamic suited Marcus perfectly. He got to make high-level strategic decisions, attend important meetings, and represent the company at industry events. I got to design brochures, manage trade show booths, and handle the social media accounts he considered beneath his attention. What Marcus never understood was that marketing meant relationships. Every trade show was an opportunity to deepen connections with clients and vendors. Every brochure redesign was a chance to understand what customers actually valued. Every social media interaction taught me what the market was responding to. While Marcus was in board meetings discussing strategy, I was in factory floors learning production capabilities. While he was negotiating contracts based on what business school had taught him, I was building relationships with the suppliers and customers who actually made those contracts work. For 10 years, this dynamic continued. Marcus as the visible leader, making pronouncements and policy decisions. Me as the invisible support system, implementing his ideas and quietly fixing his mistakes before they became catastrophic. Our father encouraged this arrangement. He'd built Chen Manufacturing with traditional values about gender roles and business succession. And having his son leading the company fulfilled something important to him about family legacy and cultural tradition. But Dad was no fool. He saw what was happening, recognized my competence and Marcus's gaps, and began having conversations with me that Marcus never knew about. 3 years before his death, my father called me into his office after hours. Marcus had left for the day, heading to some networking event he deemed essential for maintaining his professional profile. The factory floor was quiet. Third shift just starting up. And Dad looked tired in a way that made my chest tighten with worry. "Emma," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk about the future." I sat down, assuming this would be another conversation about supporting Marcus, about understanding that the company needed strong leadership, about how my role was important even if it wasn't the top position. Instead, Dad pulled out a folder thick with documents and slid it across the desk to me. "I'm dying," he said simply. "The cancer is back. And this time the doctors say I have maybe 2 years. I'm not telling your mother or Marcus yet. But you need to know." The world tilted on its axis. Dad had beaten prostate cancer 5 years earlier. And we'd all believed he was in the clear. This news was devastating. But his next words were even more shocking. "Marcus is going to destroy this company," Dad continued, his voice matter of fact despite the emotional weight of the statement. "He's smart, educated, and completely incompetent at actually running a business. He makes decisions based on what sounds impressive rather than what will work. He doesn't understand our workers, our clients, or the fundamentals that have made Chen Manufacturing successful." He tapped the folder. "But you do. You understand this business better than anyone except me. And in some ways, you understand it better than I do because you see both the traditional manufacturing side and the modern marketing and technology side." I opened the folder to find organizational charts, financial projections, and detailed documentation of every major decision Marcus had made over the past 3 years, along with annotations showing what had actually happened versus what he'd intended. It was a chronicle of near misses and disasters averted. Projects that would have failed if I hadn't quietly intervened. Client relationships that would have dissolved if I hadn't maintained them behind the scenes. Production decisions that would have been catastrophic if shop foremen hadn't come to me for reality checks before implementing Marcus's grand strategies. "I can't leave the company to you outright," Dad said. And I heard the regret in his voice. "Your mother would never accept it. Marcus would fight it legally. And frankly, the business community isn't ready for a woman running Chen Manufacturing. The discrimination you'd face would damage the company." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "So here's what we're going to do. My will is going to leave everything to Marcus officially. He'll be CEO. He'll have controlling interest. He'll get everything he's always expected. But unofficially, you're going to be the one actually running things. I'm going to spend the next 2 years teaching you everything I know about the business. Not just the operations you already understand, but the financial structure, the legal arrangements, the relationships with banks and investors. You're going to learn where everybody is buried, every weakness in our structure, every dependency that keeps this company running." He pulled out another document, a contract I didn't recognize. "And I'm going to make sure that certain key elements of the business are structured so that Marcus can't run the company without you, even if he doesn't realize it." Over the next 2 years, Dad and I engaged in what amounted to a secret MBA program specifically designed for Chen Manufacturing. We met after hours, had weekend strategy sessions disguised as family dinners, and conducted what he called succession planning that involved me learning intimate details of the business Marcus never bothered to understand. I learned that our relationship with our largest supplier was personal. The owner was Dad's old friend who gave us favorable terms based on 40 years of trust and would likely re-evaluate those terms under new leadership. I learned that several of our most important patents were actually in my mother's name, a legal structure Dad had created years ago for tax reasons that meant transferring them would require her signature. I learned that our line of credit with our primary bank was personally guaranteed by Dad, and that renewal would require the bank's confidence in new leadership, confidence that might not be automatically extended to Marcus. I learned that our most skilled workers were loyal to Dad personally and might leave for competitors if leadership changed dramatically. Most importantly, I learned that Dad had been quietly restructuring the company's dependencies so that certain critical functions, client relationships, vendor management, technical specifications, ran through systems and relationships that I controlled rather than Marcus. "I'm not sabotaging your brother," Dad explained during one of our sessions. "I'm creating a situation where he'll need your support to succeed. If he's smart enough to recognize that and work with you as a true partner, the company will thrive. If he's too arrogant to see that he needs you, then he'll fail, and you'll be positioned to pick up the pieces. Why not just leave the company to both of us equally?" I asked. "Force us to work together?" Dad smiled sadly. "Because Marcus would never accept that. He'd see it as an insult, as evidence that I didn't trust him, and he'd spend all his energy fighting you for control instead of running the business. This way, he gets what he thinks he wants, and you get the knowledge and positioning to ensure the company survives regardless of what he does." 6 months before Dad died, we had our final strategy session. The cancer had progressed aggressively, and he was clearly in pain despite medication. But his mind was sharp as ever as he reviewed everything we'd built together. "Marcus is going to push you aside," he said. "He's going to dismiss your contributions, treat you like you're just the marketing girl, and assume he can run everything himself. Let him. Don't fight for credit or recognition. Just watch, document, and prepare." "How long do I wait?" I asked. "Until he's made enough mistakes that everyone can see them," Dad replied. "Until the company is in real trouble and he's desperate. Then you step in. Not as someone trying to take over, but as someone saving the family business. That's when you'll have the moral authority and practical leverage to restructure everything the way it should have been from the beginning." He squeezed my hand, his grip weak but his determination evident. "You're going to be a great CEO, Emma. Better than I ever was. Because you'll combine my traditional manufacturing knowledge with modern business practices. But you have to be patient. You have to let Marcus fail on his own terms." Dad died 2 weeks later, surrounded by family, having made peace with his decision to leave the company to his son while secretly ensuring his daughter could save it if necessary. The funeral was held at a large church in Pittsburgh, attended by hundreds of employees, clients, suppliers, and community members whose lives Dad had touched over 40 years. The eulogies painted a picture of a man who'd achieved the American dream through hard work and integrity, who'd built a company that provided good jobs and quality products, who'd been a devoted husband and father. Marcus delivered the main eulogy, speaking about Dad's business acumen, his dedication to excellence, and his vision for Chen Manufacturing's future. He made it sound like he'd been Dad's close confidant, the chosen successor who'd learned everything at the master's feet. He didn't mention the 10 years I'd spent working alongside Dad. He didn't acknowledge the countless hours Dad and I had spent in strategy sessions. He didn't recognize that the company he was inheriting had been shaped as much by my contributions as by our father's vision. But that was fine. I'd learned from Dad that being underestimated was often an advantage in business. The reception after the funeral was where Marcus made his announcement about taking over the company, dismissing my role as marketing support, and claiming Dad's legacy as his own. The crowd's uncomfortable silence told me they recognized the disrespect. But no one was willing to challenge the new CEO on the day of his father's funeral. I smiled, agreed, and congratulated him on his new position. Then I went home and began implementing phase 1 of the strategy Dad and I had planned together. The beauty of Dad's strategy was its simplicity. I didn't need to sabotage Marcus. I just needed to stop protecting him from the consequences of his own decisions. For 10 years, I'd been quietly fixing my brother's mistakes. When he'd negotiated a contract with terms that didn't match our production capacity, I'd worked with operations to find solutions. When he'd promised delivery timelines we couldn't meet, I'd managed client expectations and coordinated with suppliers to make it work. When he'd implemented efficiency improvements that would have destroyed quality, I'd found ways to modify them into something workable. Now I stopped. I didn't interfere with his decisions. I didn't offer unsolicited advice. I didn't quietly fix problems before they became visible. I just did my job in marketing exactly as he'd defined it, creating promotional materials and managing trade show presence, while letting every other aspect of the business operate according to his directives. The cracks appeared almost immediately. Week 2. Marcus restructured our supplier relationships. renegotiating contracts to get better prices. What he didn't understand was that our existing pricing reflected relationships, quality guarantees, and reliability that cheap suppliers couldn't match. When I didn't step in to maintain those vendor relationships, several key suppliers began delivering substandard materials that passed specifications technically, but caused production problems. Month 1. Quality issues from cheaper materials began showing up in customer complaints. Marcus responded by implementing stricter quality control procedures that slowed production. The operations team came to me asking if I could convince Marcus that his solution was making things worse. I smiled and told them Marcus was the CEO now and knew what he was doing. Month 2. A major client called to complain about late deliveries and quality problems. Marcus handled the call personally, using negotiating tactics he'd learned at Wharton that completely misread the client's priorities and cultural background. The client, who'd been with Chen Manufacturing for 15 years and had a personal relationship with Dad, decided to test other suppliers for their next order. Month 3. Our line of credit came up for renewal with the bank. Marcus went into the meeting confident, armed with financial projections and strategic growth plans that looked impressive on paper. But the bank officer, who'd worked with Dad for 20 years, asked detailed questions about operations, client retention, and supplier relationships that Marcus couldn't answer convincingly. The bank renewed our credit line but at higher interest rates and with stricter covenants than we'd had before. Marcus celebrated it as a victory, not realizing he'd just made our financing significantly more expensive. Month 4. Our most experienced production manager retired. He'd been planning to work a few more years, but Marcus had made comments about outdated thinking and implementing modern management practices that made the man feel undervalued. His departure took decades of institutional knowledge with him. Month 5. Marcus implemented a new inventory management system he'd learned about at a business conference, overriding the simpler system Dad had developed over years of practical experience. The new system looked sophisticated but didn't account for the realities of our production process. Within weeks, we had critical shortages of some materials and excessive inventory of others. Through all of this, I maintained perfect professional composure. I attended executive meetings, delivered marketing reports, and responded to every request Marcus made of my department. I never said, "I told you so," because I'd never told him anything in the first place. I simply watched and documented as the company began struggling under leadership that looked impressive but lacked practical competence. Month 6. Our second largest client, frustrated with quality problems and delivery delays, announced they were shifting their orders to a competitor. Marcus called an emergency meeting, demanding to know why marketing hadn't kept the client happy. Our relationship with them was always based on Dad's personal connection and our reliable delivery, I explained calmly. They're not leaving because of marketing. They're leaving because we're no longer delivering the quality and reliability they depend on. Then fix it, Marcus snapped. That's your job. Keeping clients happy. With respect, my job is marketing communications, I replied. Client retention depends on delivering quality products on time. That's operations and production, which you've restructured significantly over the past 6 months. Marcus's face reddened, but he couldn't argue with the logic. I was doing exactly what he'd defined as my job. The fact that I used to do much more, maintaining client relationships, coordinating with production, Managing vendor communications wasn't something he'd ever acknowledged. So he couldn't accuse me of neglecting it now. By month 8, the financial stress was becoming visible. Revenue was down 15% as major clients reduced orders or switched to competitors. Profit margins had shrunk due to the combination of higher material costs, lower prices Marcus had offered to win new business, and operational inefficiencies from his improvements. The operations team was demoralized. The sales staff was frustrated. Our remaining long-term clients were concerned. And Marcus was starting to panic, though he hid it behind increasingly aggressive management style and claims that the problems were temporary adjustments to his modernization program. That's when the vultures started circling. Chen Manufacturing was a valuable mid-sized company in an industry where consolidation was common. Several larger competitors had approached Dad over the years about acquisition, always receiving polite rejections. Dad had built the company to provide good jobs and quality products, not to maximize sale value. But with the company struggling under new leadership, those competitors sensed opportunity. They reached out to Marcus with increasing frequency, mentioning how they'd always admired Chen Manufacturing and thought there might be synergies worth exploring. Marcus, desperate to be seen as a successful business leader and increasingly worried about the company's performance, began entertaining these conversations. He brought them up in board meetings as evidence of how much the company was worth, how much interest there was in what we were building. What he didn't understand was that these companies weren't interested in paying premium prices. They were waiting for Chen Manufacturing to weaken further so they could acquire it at a discount, absorb our client relationships and patents, and shut down our operations to eliminate competition. I watched these discussions with careful attention, documenting every conversation, every offer, every sign that Marcus was considering selling out the company our parents had built. Month 10. One of our largest remaining clients issued a formal warning about quality problems, stating that one more failed delivery would result in termination of our contract. This client represented 20% of our remaining revenue. Losing them would be catastrophic. Marcus called an all-hands meeting, delivered an angry speech about everyone needing to step up their game, and implemented even stricter controls that further slowed production. 2 weeks later, we missed the delivery deadline due to supply chain problems that could have been avoided if we'd maintained our old vendor relationships. The client, fed up after months of problems, terminated the contract. Our revenue dropped 25% overnight. Month 12. The bank, concerned about our deteriorating financials, demanded a meeting to review our credit line covenant compliance. Marcus discovered that we were in technical violation of several covenants due to our reduced profitability and increased debt ratio. The bank officer was sympathetic but firm. Either we needed to inject new capital to improve our financial position, or they'd have to reduce our credit line, which would make operations nearly impossible. Marcus didn't have personal capital to inject. The company's cash reserves had been depleted by operational losses, and his pride prevented him from admitting the scope of the problems to potential investors. He started having serious conversations with the companies interested in acquisition, discussing possible sale terms that would allow him to exit with some dignity and financial return. Month 14. A mid-sized competitor made a formal acquisition offer. $20 million for all assets, assuming all debts, retaining key employees. It was a lowball offer. Dad had been offered twice that amount 3 years earlier when the company was thriving. But Marcus was desperate. The company was losing money every month. Key employees were leaving. Clients were defecting. The bank was threatening to cut our credit line. His dreams of being a successful CEO were crumbling. And the acquisition offer looked like a life raft. He called a board meeting to discuss the offer. The board consisted of Marcus as controlling shareholder, our mother who'd always deferred to her son, me as a minority shareholder, and two outside directors who were longtime family friends. Marcus presented the acquisition offer as if it were a triumph, evidence of how much value he'd created, how smart he was to be selling at exactly the right time, how this would provide financial security for our mother and allow everyone to move on to new opportunities. Our mother looked confused. She'd been largely sheltered from the company's struggles, with Marcus assuring her everything was fine. Now suddenly he was proposing to sell the business she and Dad had spent their lives building. The two outside directors looked uncomfortable. They'd watched Marcus run the company into the ground over 14 months but had been reluctant to speak up against the son of their old friend. I remained silent, watching Marcus make his pitch. The market has changed, Marcus explained. Chen Manufacturing's traditional approach doesn't work in modern manufacturing. We need either massive capital investment to compete or we need to join forces with a larger company that can provide economies of scale. He looked at me, expecting support. Emma, you've seen the marketing challenges. You know how hard it is to compete against bigger players. This acquisition makes sense. Everyone turned to me, waiting for my response. I pulled out a folder I'd been preparing for 14 months, comprehensive documentation of everything that had gone wrong under Marcus's leadership. Financial comparisons showing the company's decline. Client exit interviews explaining why they'd left. Operational analyses showing the impact of his improvements. Market data proving that our traditional approach hadn't been the problem. Marcus's execution had been. Chen Manufacturing isn't failing because the market changed, I said calmly. It's failing because of systematic mismanagement over the past 14 months. Every decision Marcus made as CEO weakened the company. Every improvement he implemented created new problems. Every relationship Dad built over 40 years has been damaged or destroyed. Marcus's face flushed with anger. That's not fair. You're just bitter that I'm CEO instead of you. I'm not bitter, I replied. I'm accurate. Everything I'm saying is documented right here. Financial reports, client feedback, operational data. The evidence is overwhelming. I turned to our mother and the board members. This acquisition offer values the company at less than half what it was worth when Dad died. Marcus has destroyed over $20 million in value in 14 months through incompetent leadership. If you have such great ideas, why didn't you speak up earlier? Marcus demanded. Because you made it clear you didn't want my input, I said simply. You defined my role as marketing communications and told me to stay in my lane. I did exactly what you asked. The room fell silent. Marcus's narrative about being a brilliant CEO was collapsing. But he couldn't admit it without destroying whatever reputation he had left. So what do you suggest? Our mother asked me, speaking for the first time. Should we accept this offer? I shook my head. I suggest we restructure leadership. Bring in someone who actually knows how to run this company. Rebuild the relationships Marcus has damaged. Return to the operational practices that made Chen Manufacturing successful for 40 years. And who exactly would this new leader be? Marcus asked sarcastically. You? If necessary, I replied. Dad spent his final 2 years teaching me everything about running this business. I understand operations, finance, client relationships, and strategic planning. More importantly, I understand what made Chen Manufacturing special, and what it needs to become successful again. Marcus laughed bitterly. You're delusional. You think you can just take over the company Dad left to me? I think I can save the company you've destroyed, I corrected. The question is whether you're willing to accept help, or whether you'd rather sell it for pennies on the dollar and let someone else shut it down. The board meeting turned into a 6-hour marathon as we debated the future of Chen Manufacturing. Marcus argued for accepting the acquisition offer, framing it as the responsible choice given market conditions. I argued for rejecting the offer and restructuring leadership, presenting detailed plans for how to rebuild the company. Our mother listened to both presentations, clearly torn between loyalty to her son and recognition that the company she'd helped build was being destroyed. The two outside directors asked increasingly pointed questions that Marcus struggled to answer convincingly. When had he last spoken directly with our major clients? He couldn't remember. Why had he changed supplier relationships that had been stable for decades? Because he'd negotiated better prices, except quality had suffered and total costs had actually increased. What was his plan for reversing the company's decline if the acquisition didn't happen? He didn't have one beyond working harder and hoping things improved. Finally, at nearly midnight, one of the outside directors addressed Marcus directly. Marcus, I loved your father like a brother. I watched you grow up, attended your graduation from Wharton, and celebrated when you joined the company. I wanted nothing more than to see you succeed as CEO. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But you're not succeeding. You're failing. And you're taking your family's legacy down with you. Everything Emma has said is accurate. Everything in her documentation is true. You've made mistake after mistake, ignored advice from experienced people, and let your pride prevent you from acknowledging problems until they became crises. Marcus started to protest, but the director held up his hand. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's true. And because this company is too important to let it fail out of respect for your feelings. If you stay as CEO, Chen Manufacturing will be bankrupt within 6 months. If you accept this acquisition offer, the company will be stripped for parts and hundreds of people will lose their jobs. He turned to me. Emma, do you genuinely believe you can turn this around? Yes, I said without hesitation. I know every client, every vendor, every operational challenge. I know what this company needs to be successful, and I know how to implement it. Give me 12 months and I'll have us profitable again. Give me 18 months and I'll have us thriving. The second outside director nodded. I vote to reject the acquisition offer and restructure leadership with Emma as CEO. Our mother looked at Marcus, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, son, but I agree. Your sister needs to lead the company now. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, anger, betrayal, and finally resignation. You're all making a huge mistake, he said quietly. But fine. If you want Emma to fail where I succeeded, go ahead. You didn't succeed, Marcus, I said gently. But I'm going to. And when I do, you'll still be a shareholder. You'll still benefit from the company's success. You'll just do it without being in charge. The vote was unanimous. Reject the acquisition offer. Install Emma as CEO. Retain Marcus as a minority shareholder with no operational role. My brother left the meeting without another word. And I became the leader of the company I'd been preparing to save for 14 months. My first day as CEO of Chen Manufacturing. I arrived at the office at 6 a.m. Before any other employees. I sat in Dad's chair, now my chair, and reviewed the detailed plan I'd been refining since the day he died. The task ahead was enormous. Rebuild client relationships. Return to reliable suppliers. Restore operational practices that worked. Rehire experienced employees who'd left. Convince the bank we were stable enough to maintain our credit line. Prove to everyone who'd doubted me that I belonged in this chair. But I'd spent 14 months preparing for exactly this moment. Week 1. I personally called every major client who'd left or reduced orders during Marcus's tenure. I didn't make excuses or blame my brother. I simply acknowledged that we'd failed to meet their standards. Explained the changes I was implementing. And asked for a chance to earn back their trust. Some rejected me immediately. Others were skeptical but agreed to small trial orders. A few, who'd loved working with Dad, welcomed the change in leadership and immediately restored their business. Week 2. I met with our key suppliers, the ones Marcus had abandoned in favor of cheaper alternatives. I explained that we were returning to our traditional relationships, acknowledged that we'd made mistakes, and negotiated return to the terms and quality standards that had served us well for decades. Several suppliers were willing to work with us again, though they requested payment terms that reflected reduced trust. I agreed, knowing that rebuilding those relationships was essential to restoring quality. Month 2. I brought back the production manager who'd retired, offering him a consulting contract to help retrain our operations team and restore the processes Marcus had disrupted. His return immediately improved morale among longtime employees who'd felt disrespected under my brother's leadership. Month 3. I restructured our pricing to reflect actual costs plus fair profit margins, eliminating the unsustainable discounting Marcus had used to try to win new business. We lost a few price-sensitive clients but retained those who valued quality and reliability. Month 4. I met with our bank to present detailed financial projections showing the company's path back to profitability. The bank officer, impressed by the operational improvements and client relationship rebuilding, agreed to maintain our credit line at reasonable terms. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Every day brought new challenges, unexpected problems, and moments when I questioned whether I'd taken on too much too quickly. But every day also brought small victories that proved the strategy was working. Month 6. We delivered our first major order under my leadership, on time, meeting all quality specifications, exceeding client expectations. The client, who'd been considering switching to a competitor, instead increased their order volume for the next quarter. Month 8. Our financial statements showed our first profitable month in over a year. The profit was modest, but it represented the turning point from decline to recovery. Month 10. A major industry publication ran a feature article about Chen Manufacturing's turnaround, highlighting the innovative young CEO who saved her family's legacy. The article brought new business inquiries and attracted the attention of industry analysts who'd written off the company under Marcus's leadership. Month 12. Exactly 1 year after taking over as CEO, I presented financial results to the board showing that we'd returned to profitability, restored most of our client relationships, and positioned the company for sustainable growth. Our mother cried with relief and pride. The outside directors congratulated me on executing exactly what I'd promised. And Marcus, attending the meeting as a minority shareholder, sat silently with an expression I couldn't quite read. Month 14. Marcus requested a private meeting. We met at a coffee shop near the office. Neutral territory where we could talk without the weight of company headquarters surrounding us. He looked older than his 38 years. The stress of the past 2 years evident in his face. He'd taken a position at a consulting firm, using his Wharton MBA to advise other companies while watching from a distance as I succeeded where he'd failed. "I owe you an apology," he started, the words clearly difficult for him. "I spent my entire life believing I was entitled to run Chen Manufacturing because I was Dad's son. I never questioned whether I was actually qualified, whether I understood the business, whether I had the skills necessary to lead." He stirred his coffee absently. "I dismissed your contributions, treated you like you were just playing at business while I did the real work. I never recognized that you were learning everything while I was just performing." I listened, without interrupting, letting him get it all out. "Watching you turn the company around has been," he paused, searching for words, "humbling, painful, but also eye-opening. You saved Chen Manufacturing, Emma. You saved Dad's legacy. You saved jobs for hundreds of people. And you did it all while I was convinced you'd fail. I didn't do it to prove anything to you," I said gently. "I did it because the company needed to be saved. And I was the one who could do it." Marcus nodded. "I know. That's what makes it even worse. This was never about competition for you. It was about the business, the employees, the legacy. Meanwhile, I made it all about my ego and my need to be seen as successful." He looked directly at me for the first time. "Can you forgive me? Not for my sake, but because we're family and I don't want to spend the rest of my life estranged from my sister." I thought about everything that had happened. His dismissiveness at Dad's funeral. The 14 months of watching the company struggle while I waited for the right moment to act. The board meeting where I'd had to systematically dismantle his claims of competence. But I also thought about what Dad had taught me. Family was more important than pride. And forgiveness was possible even after serious betrayals if the person was genuinely remorseful. "I forgive you," I said. "But things have to be different between us going forward. I need you to respect my capabilities, acknowledge that I earned this position, and support the decisions I make for the company rather than undermining them because you think you should be in charge." "I can do that," Marcus said quickly. "I have been doing that. The consulting work I do now has taught me to recognize good leadership when I see it. And Emma? You're a genuinely talented CEO. Better than I ever would have been." He smiled ruefully. "It turns out there's a difference between learning about business and actually being good at business. Wharton taught me theory. You learned practice. And practice is what matters." Month 30. Chen Manufacturing had fully recovered from the damage of Marcus's tenure and was now exceeding our performance from Dad's final years. Revenue was up 40% from when I'd taken over as CEO. Profit margins were the highest they'd been in company history. We'd landed several major new clients and expanded into new product lines that leveraged our manufacturing expertise. Industry publications were calling Chen Manufacturing a model for successful family business succession. Though most articles got the story wrong, assuming Marcus had gracefully transitioned leadership to his capable sister rather than understanding that I'd had to save the company from his incompetence. That was fine. I didn't need public credit for the struggle. I had the reality of success. The satisfaction of knowing I'd preserved Dad's legacy. And the respect of employees and clients who understood what I'd accomplished. The acquisition offer that Marcus had been ready to accept for $20 million. A competitor reached out with interest in buying Chen Manufacturing for $85 million, more than 4 times what Marcus would have accepted and significantly more than the company had been worth even under Dad's leadership. I rejected the offer without serious consideration. Chen Manufacturing wasn't for sale. It was a family legacy that would continue under my leadership, providing good jobs and quality products just as Dad had intended. Our mother, now in her 70s, had fully embraced my leadership of the company. She attended quarterly board meetings, asked insightful questions about strategy and operations, and occasionally mentioned how proud Dad would be of what I'd accomplished. He always knew, she told me during one meeting, the last few years of his life. He spent so much time with you, teaching you everything. I thought he was just being a good father, making time for his daughter. But he was preparing you for exactly this. She smiled with a mixture of sadness and pride. He couldn't leave the company to you directly because of tradition and expectations. But he made sure you'd be ready when the time came to save it. Marcus had found his own path to success. His consulting work focused on helping family businesses navigate succession planning. And he'd become sought after specifically because of his experience with both failure and recovery. At Chen Manufacturing, I tell every client the same thing, he mentioned during a family dinner. Don't assume the obvious successor is the right one. Look for competence over tradition. And never underestimate the person who's been quietly learning while everyone else is performing. He'd become a genuinely good consultant by learning from his own mistakes. And while he'd never run a company again, he was helping other families avoid the errors he'd made. Our relationship had healed, though it was different now. He was my brother but not my competitor. He respected my authority and occasionally offered advice that was actually helpful. Most importantly, he'd stopped resenting my success and started genuinely supporting it. 3 years after taking over, I was invited to accept an industry leadership award at a major manufacturing conference. The award recognized CEOs who demonstrated exceptional leadership in transforming their companies, while maintaining core values and supporting their communities. The presentation video shown at the awards ceremony chronicled Chen Manufacturing's journey, from Dad's immigrant success story to my leadership during a critical transition period. It highlighted the company's recovery, growth, and continued commitment to quality and employee welfare. What the video carefully omitted was the year of Marcus's leadership and the near-catastrophic decline that had preceded my taking over. Some stories were better left simplified for public consumption. I accepted the award wearing a dress my mother had bought me for the occasion. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of industry leaders who'd once dismissed me as just the marketing girl. My father built Chen Manufacturing on principles that seemed old-fashioned even 30 years ago, I said in my acceptance speech. Quality over quantity. Relationships over transactions. Employees as family rather than resources. When I became CEO, people suggested I needed to modernize, to implement contemporary business practices, to think bigger and move faster. I paused, looking out at the audience. Instead, I doubled down on Dad's principles. I restored the relationships my predecessor had damaged. I returned to the operational practices that emphasized quality over efficiency metrics. I treated our employees as the valuable, experienced professionals they were rather than as interchangeable resources to be optimized. The result was that Chen Manufacturing didn't just recover, it thrived. We proved that the old-fashioned principles my father believed in weren't outdated. They were timeless. And they worked better than any modern business theory precisely because they prioritized people and relationships over abstract metrics and short-term profits. The speech received a standing ovation. And afterward, dozens of business leaders approached me wanting to learn more about our approach. Several offered consulting opportunities. A few mentioned they were looking for CEOs for their own companies and asked if I'd be interested. I politely declined all offers. Chen Manufacturing was where I belonged. Continuing the work Dad had started and ensuring the legacy would continue for another generation. 5 years after taking over as CEO, the company was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. Revenue had more than doubled from my first year as CEO. We'd expanded into international markets, opened a second manufacturing facility, and developed proprietary technologies that put us at the forefront of our industry. Industry analysts valued Chen Manufacturing at over $200 million, 10 times what Marcus had been willing to accept during his desperate final months as CEO. Then I received a call from the CEO of one of the world's largest manufacturing conglomerates. They weren't interested in buying Chen Manufacturing outright. Instead, they wanted to discuss a partnership that would give us access to their global distribution network, their R&D resources, and their capital for expansion. The proposed deal was complex but essentially came down to this. They'd acquire 40% of Chen Manufacturing for $100 million in cash, providing capital for aggressive expansion while keeping me as CEO with complete operational control. Chen Manufacturing would remain independent, keep our name and values, but have the resources of a Fortune 500 company behind us. It was the kind of deal Dad had always refused. He'd built Chen Manufacturing to remain independent and family-controlled. But it was also the kind of deal that could take the company to a level of success Dad had never imagined. I called a board meeting to discuss the proposal. Our mother, now 76 but still mentally sharp, listened carefully to the presentation. Marcus, attending as a minority shareholder, asked surprisingly insightful questions about how the partnership would affect company culture and operational independence. The outside directors were enthusiastic about the financial opportunity but concerned about maintaining the values that had made Chen Manufacturing special. Dad always refused these kinds of deals, Marcus pointed out. He wanted the company to stay family-owned and independent. Dad also adapted when market conditions changed, I countered. He started with a small machine shop and grew it into a mid-sized manufacturer by recognizing opportunities and taking calculated risks. This partnership maintains our independence while giving us resources to compete globally. I looked around the table. The question isn't whether Dad would have done this exact deal. The question is whether this partnership serves the company's long-term interests, protects our employees, and allows us to continue the values Dad established. After hours of debate, the board voted to accept the partnership. The deal closed 3 months later, making Chen Manufacturing part of a larger ecosystem while maintaining the independence and culture that defined us. The $100 million capital injection was divided among shareholders. Our mother received enough to ensure complete financial security for the rest of her life. Marcus received several million that he invested wisely. and I received a substantial sum while retaining majority control of the company. But more important than the money was what the partnership enabled. Chen Manufacturing could now compete globally, invest in cutting-edge technology, and create opportunities for our employees that would never have been possible as an independent, mid-sized company. On the 5-year anniversary of becoming CEO, our family gathered for dinner at the house where Marcus and I had grown up, now owned by our mother, who'd chosen to stay in the home filled with memories rather than move somewhere more luxurious. It was just the three of us, sharing a meal like we'd done thousands of times before Dad's death. But the dynamics had completely shifted. Marcus had become a successful consultant and seemed genuinely content with his life. He'd married a woman who appreciated him for who he was rather than what he could provide. And they were expecting their first child. "I'm going to tell my kid about Chen Manufacturing," Marcus said during dinner. "About how Grandpa built it from nothing. How I almost destroyed it through arrogance and incompetence. And how Aunt Emma saved it and turned it into something even bigger than Grandpa imagined." He looked at me seriously. "I want my children to understand that success isn't about entitlement or expectations. It's about competence, hard work, and recognizing your own limitations. I failed at that. You excelled at it. And the difference between us changed everything." Our mother reached across the table to hold both our hands. "Your father would be so proud of both of you, Emma, for what you've accomplished with the company. Marcus, for having the humility to learn from your failures and help others avoid them." She smiled through tears. "He always said the best families aren't the ones that never struggle. They're the ones that struggle together and come out stronger on the other side." 10 years after becoming CEO, Chen Manufacturing is now a $400 million company with facilities in 3 countries, over 2,000 employees, and a reputation as one of the best-managed mid-sized manufacturers in the industry. I'm 45 years old, married to an engineer who works in our R&D department, and we have 2 children, a daughter named Susan after my mother, and a son named Michael after my father. Both kids spend weekends at the factory, learning the business the same way I did, understanding that legacies aren't inherited, they're earned through dedication, competence, and respect for the work that came before. Marcus's consulting practice has grown into a successful firm specializing in family business succession. He uses Chen Manufacturing as his primary case study, openly discussing his failures and his sister's success as teaching tools for clients facing similar transitions. "The hardest thing I ever did was admit I wasn't qualified to lead Chen Manufacturing," he tells clients. "The best thing I ever did was step aside and let someone more competent take over. My ego wanted to fight, but my intelligence recognized that saving the company was more important than saving face." Our mother is 82 now, still attending quarterly board meetings when her health allows. She keeps a photo on her mantle of Dad and me from his final year, taken during one of our secret strategy sessions that everyone assumed was just a father-daughter dinner. "He knew," she tells her grandchildren when they visit. "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he spent all that time with your mother. He was building the CEO Chen Manufacturing needed, even if he couldn't publicly acknowledge it at the time. The industry now recognizes me as one of the most successful CEOs in the manufacturing sector. I'm regularly invited to speak at conferences, serve on advisory boards, and mentor young women entering male-dominated industries. But the recognition I value most comes from our employees, many of whom worked for Dad, survived Marcus's tenure, and have thrived under my leadership. They know the real story of how Chen Manufacturing was saved, and they tell it to new hires as a reminder that good companies are built by good people who put mission over ego. If you're listening to this story because you've been underestimated, dismissed, or told you're not qualified to lead despite knowing you're more capable than those in charge, I want you to understand something important. Being underestimated is often an advantage in business and in life. When people assume you're less capable than you are, they lower their guard. They make mistakes they wouldn't make if they took you seriously. They reveal weaknesses and vulnerabilities they'd hide from someone they perceived as a threat. Marcus dismissed me as just the marketing girl for 10 years while I was actually learning every aspect of the business. His arrogance made him blind to my competence, and that blindness ultimately gave me the knowledge and positioning I needed to save the company he nearly destroyed. But here's what's most important. I didn't succeed through sabotage or revenge. I succeeded through competence, preparation, and patience. I let Marcus fail on his own terms while I prepared to succeed on mine. When Dad and I were planning our strategy, he told me something I've never forgotten. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's building something so successful that their destruction becomes irrelevant. Marcus tried to exclude me from the family business. Instead of fighting him for recognition, I let him claim what he thought he wanted while I learned what I actually needed to know. When he inevitably failed, I was ready not just to take over, but to excel. That's the real lesson of this story. Success isn't about fighting for what others think you deserve. It's about preparing yourself so completely that when opportunity arrives, and it always eventually arrives, you're undeniably qualified to seize it. Today, Chen Manufacturing employs over 2,000 people, generates hundreds of millions in revenue, and maintains the values my father established 40 years ago. Not because I fought my brother for control, but because I prepared for the moment when someone needed to save the company, and I was the only one qualified to do it. Marcus isn't my enemy anymore. He's my brother who learned humility through failure and became a better person as a result. Our relationship is stronger now than it was before Dad died, precisely because we both had to face hard truths about ourselves. But I'm not naive enough to pretend the journey was easy or fair. I spent 10 years being dismissed, 14 months watching the company struggle while I waited for the right moment, and then 5 years rebuilding what had been destroyed. That's 30 years of my life dedicated to a company I supposedly wasn't qualified to lead. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Because Chen Manufacturing isn't just a business. It's my father's dream, my mother's sacrifice, and my legacy to pass on to my own children. And unlike my brother, I actually earned the right to lead it. To every woman who's been told she's just the marketing person, the HR manager, the assistant, the support staff, while men with less competence are given leadership positions. Document everything. Learn everything. Prepare completely. Your moment will come. And when it does, make sure you're so undeniably qualified that no one can question your right to lead. To every person who's been passed over for promotion because of gender, age, race, or any factor unrelated to actual competence, being underestimated is temporary. Being prepared is permanent. Let others fight for recognition while you build genuine expertise. When those seeking recognition inevitably fail, your competence will speak for itself. And to everyone who's watched incompetent people destroy things you care about, Sometimes the best strategy isn't immediate intervention. It's patient preparation combined with the discipline to wait for the right moment to act. I didn't save Chen manufacturing by fighting my brother. I saved it by being ready when the time came to stop watching and start leading. Marcus thought he won when Dad's will made him CEO. He had no idea he'd actually inherited a test he was destined to fail, while I'd inherited the knowledge necessary to pass it. The daughter who was supposed to be decorative became the CEO who saved the company. The brother who was supposed to lead became the cautionary tale about why competence matters more than expectations. And the company that nearly failed became a model for family business success. All because a father knew his daughter could lead. A daughter prepared herself to do so. And a brother eventually learned that ego is expensive but humility is priceless. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or watched incompetent people damage things you cared about, remember that patience and preparation are more powerful than immediate confrontation. Hit that subscribe button to join over 800,000 readers who believe that the best revenge is excellence. The best validation is results. And the best victory is succeeding where others predicted you'd fail. Share this story with someone who's being underestimated. Someone who's preparing for their moment. Someone who needs to know that being dismissed today doesn't determine your success tomorrow. Leave a comment about your own experiences with being underestimated. How you prepared for your moment. Or how you're currently building the expertise that will prove everyone wrong. Because the most dangerous person in any organization isn't the one with the most impressive title. It's the one everyone underestimates who's quietly preparing to show them all what real leadership looks like.